What if I told you that the modern banking system, the credit cards in your wallet, the wire transfers you rely on, the very concept of a check, wasn't invented by Wall Street? What if I told you it was invented 900 years ago by a group of monks who were sworn to poverty? It sounds impossible, doesn't it? Men who owned nothing yet controlled everything. Men who famously depicted themselves on their seal as two knights riding a single horse because they couldn't afford two, yet birthed the most formidable economic engine of the High Middle Ages. We know them as the Knights Templar. History remembers them as holy warriors, crusaders in white mantles with red crosses. But that is the official story. The real story is about money. Because before they were destroyed, the Templars weren't just knights. They were the world's first multinational corporation. They were the inventors of the encrypted letter of credit. And they were the first victims of a financial truth that still haunts us today. When a private bank becomes more powerful than the state doesn't file a lawsuit. It sharpens its sword. Welcome to Economic Chronicler, where we trace the bloodlines of money and power. Today, we are opening the ledger on the day the bank died. To understand how this happened, we have to go back to 1119. The Crusades are raging. Jerusalem is a dangerous place. A French knight named Hugues de Payens starts a small order with a simple mission: protect Christian pilgrims on the bandit-infested roads to the Holy City. At first, they were poor. But then something changed. They didn't just get donations. They got privileges. In 1139, the Pope issued a bull called Omni Datum Optimum. It was a golden ticket. It granted the Templars total exemption from tithes taxes while allowing them to collect their own. Furthermore, they were declared immune to all secular and ecclesiastical authority save for the Pope himself. Imagine a corporation today that pays zero tax, operates in every country, and ignores local laws. That was the Temple. They built a massive supply chain that spanned continents. They had fortified estates called preceptories across France, England, and Italy. They managed vineyards, wheat farms, wool industries, and shipping fleets. They functioned exactly like a modern multinational subsidiary structure, moving capital from profit centers in Europe to cost centers in the Holy Land. But their greatest invention wasn't agricultural, it was financial. In the 12th century, moving money was deadly. If you were a pilgrim traveling from London to Jerusalem, you had to carry gold. And if you carried gold, you were a target for robbery or murder. The Templars fixed this by effectively inventing the concept of dematerialized money. They created the letter of credit, the direct ancestor of the traveler's check. Here's how it worked. You walk into the Temple Church in London. You deposit a sum of money. The Templar treasurer issues you a piece of parchment, a letter of credit. This document is encrypted using a secret cipher based on the geometry of the Maltese cross. You travel across Europe with nothing but this paper. If bandits rob you, the paper is useless to them because they cannot decipher it or prove their identity. When you get to Jerusalem, you hand over the letter, and the Templars dispense the equivalent value in local currency. This was revolutionary. It separated the ownership of value from the physical location of the currency. The gold didn't actually move. The Templars just adjusted their books. They didn't stop there. They invented the safe deposit box. Kings would deposit their wills and treaties at the temple because it was a stone fortress guarded by professional soldiers. But there was a problem. The Catholic Church said charging interest on loans was a sin called usury. So, how did these holy monks become the largest lenders in Christendom? They found a loophole. The Templars were masters of avoidance techniques. They didn't charge interest. They charged rent and administration fees. They popularized the mortgage, literally, the dead pledge. If you needed a loan, you gave the Templars your land. They would keep all the crops and income from that land while you owed them money. In a dead pledge, these profits didn't even pay down the loan principal. They were kept as rent. They also played the currency market. They would lend you money in one currency, like French livres, and ask for repayment in another, like Jerusalem bezants, bearing their profit in the exchange rate. By the 13th century, they were so good at this that they became the bankers to the state. The Temple in Paris became the center of the French financial system, acting as the de facto finance ministry. The Templars collected the king's taxes and audited royal accounts. They financed the crusades, royal dowries, and even the ransoms of kings. They were the IMF and Goldman Sachs rolled into one, and That was their mistake. Fast forward to the year 1300. The Templars have a problem. The crusades are over. Acre has fallen in 1291. They are an army without a war, sitting in their castles in France, paying no taxes, and answering only to a distant pope. To the emerging nation-state of France, they looked like a state within a state. France was ruled by King Philip IV, known as the Fair. He was obsessed with power and perpetually on the brink of bankruptcy. He had spent a fortune fighting wars against England. Philip was desperate. To raise cash, he expelled the Jews and seized their assets. He debased the French currency, reducing its silver content by 2/3, which caused rampant inflation and riots. In 1306, during one of these riots, Philip had to flee his palace and hide in the Paris Temple, the fortress of the very bankers he owed money to. Historians believe that while hiding there, witnessing the order's immense wealth, Philip resolved to destroy them. Eliminating the Templars would erase his massive debt and allow him to seize their assets. But he was the king, and in the game of power, the state invariably wields the sword. Philip decided he wasn't going to default on his loan. He was going to liquidate the bank. Philip needed a reason. He couldn't just say, "I want your money." He had to destroy their moral legitimacy. His ruthless minister, Guillaume de Nogret, infiltrated the order with spies. They cooked up the most horrific charges imaginable: heresy, denying Christ, spitting on the cross, and worshipping a cat-like idol named Baphomet. On September 14, 1307, Philip sent sealed orders to his bailiffs across France. The orders were to be opened only on the appointed day. On Friday, October 13, 1307, a date that lives in infamy, the trap snapped shut. At dawn, royal agents struck. Thousands of Templars were dragged from their beds and thrown into dungeons. The element of surprise was total. The safe deposit box was cracked open. The torture that followed was brutal. The Inquisition used the rack and the sfrapedo to force confessions. Even the Grand Master Jacques de Molay broke under the pain and confessed to denying Christ. The Templars were finished. We now know, thanks to the Chinon parchment discovered in the Vatican archives in 2001, that Pope Clement V actually absolved the Templars of heresy. He knew they were innocent, but Philip IV threatened the Pope with a schism. Under extreme coercion, the Pope dissolved the order in 1312, not by judicial sentence, but by apostolic ordinance. The final act of this tragedy happened on March 18, 1314. Jacques de Molay was brought out in front of Notre Dame Cathedral to publicly confess his crimes one last time. But he went off script. In a moment of dramatic defiance, de Molay shouted to the crowd that the order was innocent and that the charges were false. Philip IV, enraged, ordered him to be burned at the stake that very evening. As the flames consumed him on the Isle des Juifs, de Molay reportedly shouted a curse. He summoned Pope Clement V and King Philip IV to appear before the tribunal of God within a year. And here is where history gets strange. The Pope died just 33 days later. King Philip suffered a stroke while hunting and died that November. Within 14 years, Philip's entire dynasty was extinct. But the real legacy isn't the curse. It's the economics. The story of the Knights Templar is a brutal lesson in political economy. The Templars were the medieval equivalent of a systemically important financial institution, yet they lacked the ultimate protection: sovereignty. They assumed their money made them untouchable. They failed to price in political risk. They violated the cardinal rule of banking: never lend more to a client than you can afford to lose, especially if that client is a king who can rewrite the laws. We see this pattern repeat again and again. The Templars invented the machinery of modern finance: the check, the branch bank, the audit, but they paid for those inventions with their lives. They proved that in the confrontation between the raw power of the state and the soft power of financial capital, the state always wins. So the next time you use a bank draft or a wire transfer, remember the warrior monks who started it all. And remember that in the ledger of history, debt is often settled in blood. I'm the Economic Chronicler. If you want to understand the future of your money, you have to read the past. Subscribe, and I'll help you decode the history of wealth.